The Argonian Account, Book 1, by Wahin Yarth. On a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City sat, or perhaps lounged, Lord Bannock's building commission. It was an unimaginative, austere building, not noted so much for its aesthetic or architectural design as for its prodigious length. If any critics wonder why such an ornamented, extended erection held such fascination for Lord Bannock, they kept it to themselves. In the 398 year of the Third Era, Decumus Scotti was a senior clerk at the Commission. It had been a few months since the shy middle-aged man had brought Lord Bannock the most lucrative of all contracts, granting the Commission the exclusive right to rebuild the roads of Valenwood, which had been destroyed in the 5-year war. For this, he had become the darling of the managers and the clerks, spending his days recounting his adventures, more or less faithfully, although he did omit the ending of the tale, since many of them had partaken in the celebratory Unthrapa roast provided by the Silenstri, informing one's listeners that they have gorged on human flesh improves very few stories of any good taste. Scotti was neither particularly ambitious or hard-working, so he did not mind that Lord Bannock had not given him anything to actually do. Whenever the squat little gnomish man would happen upon Decumus Scotti in the offices, Lord Bannock would always say, "You're a credit to the Commission. Keep up the good work." In the beginning, Scotti had worried that he was supposed to be doing something, but as the months went on, he merely replied, "Thank you, I will." There was, on the other hand, the future to consider. He was not a young man, and though he was receiving a respectable salary for someone not doing actual work, Scotti considered that soon he might have to retire and not get paid for not doing work. It would be nice, he decided, if Lord Bannock, out of gratitude for the millions of gold the Valenwood contract was generating, might deign to make Scotti a partner, or at least give him a small percentage of the bounty. Decumus Scotti was no good at asking for things like that, which was one of the reasons why, previous to his signal success in Valenwood as a senior clerk for Lord Atreus, he was a lousy agent. He had just about made up his mind to say something to Lord Bannock when his lordship unexpectedly pushed things along. "You're a credit to the Commission," the waddling little thing said, and then paused. "Do you have a moment free on your schedule?" Scotti nodded, eagerly, and followed his lordship to his hideously decorated and very enviable hectare of office space. "Zenithar blesses us for your presence at the Commission." The little fellow squeaked grandly. "I don't know whether you know this, but we were having a bad time before you came along. We had impressive projects, for certain, but they were not successful. In Black Marsh, for example, for years we have been trying to improve the roads and other routes for travel, for commerce. I put my best man, Flessus Dijo, on it, but every year, despite staggering investments of time and money, the trade along those routes only gets slower and slower. Now, we have your very clean, very profitable Valenwood contract to boost the Commission's profits. I think it's time you were rewarded." Scotti grinned, a grin of great modesty and subtle avarice. "I want you to take over the Black Marsh account from Flessus Dijo." Scotti shook as if awaking from a pleasant dream to a hideous reality. "My lord, I couldn't—" "Nonsense," chirped Lord Bannock. "Don't worry about Dijo. He will be happy to retire on the money I give him, particularly as soul-wrenchingly difficult as this Black Marsh business has been. Just your sort of a challenge, my dear Decumus." Scotti couldn't utter a sound, though his mouth feebly formed the word "no" as Lord Bannock brought out the box of documentation on Black Marsh. "You're a fast reader," Lord Bannock guessed. "You can read it all en route to..." Black Marsh, of course, the tiny fellow giggled. You're a funny chap. Where else would you go to learn about the works that's being done and how to improve it? The next morning, the stack of documentation hardly touched. Decumus Scotti began the journey southeast to Black Marsh. Lord Bannock had hired an able-bodied guard, a rather taciturn red guard named Malik, to protect his best agent. They rode south along the Niven and then southeast along the Silverfish, continuing into the wilds of Cyrodiil, where the river tributaries had no names and the very vegetation seemed to come from another world than the nice civilized gardens of the northern imperial province. Scotty's horse was tied to Malik's, so the clerk was able to read. It made it difficult to pay attention to the path they were taking, but Scotty knew he needed at least a cursory familiarity with the Commission's business dealings in Black Marsh. It was a huge box of paperwork, going back 40 years, when the Commission had first been given several million in gold by a wealthy trader, Lord Celicles Pinos Ravina, to improve the condition of the road from Gideon to Cyrodiil. At that time it took 3 weeks, a preposterously long time for the rice and root he was importing to arrive, half rotten in the imperial province. Pinos Ravina was long dead, but many other investors over the decades, including Pelagius IV himself, had hired the Commission to build roads, drain swamps, construct bridges, devise anti-smuggling systems, hire mercenaries, and, in short, do everything that the greatest empire in history knew would work to aid trade with Black Marsh. According to the latest figures, the result of this was that it took 2.5 months for goods, now thoroughly rotten, to arrive. Scotty found that when he looked up after concentrating on what he was reading, the landscape had always changed, always dramatically, always for the worse. "This is Blackwood, sir," said Malik to Scotty's unspoken question. It was dark and woodsy, so Decumus Scotti thought that a very appropriate name. The question he longed to ask, which in due course he did ask, was that terrible smell? "Slough Point, sir," Malik replied as they turned the next bend, where the umbrageous tunnel of tangled tree and vine opened to a clearing. There squatted a cluster of formal buildings in the dreary imperial design favored by Lord Bannock's commission, and every emperor since Tiber, together with a stench so eye-blindingly, stomach-wrenchingly awful that Scotty wondered, suddenly, if it were deadly poisonous. The swarms of blood-colored, sand-grain-sized insects obscuring the air did not improve the view. Scotty and Malik batted at the buzzing clouds as they rode the horses towards the largest of the buildings, which on approach revealed itself to be perched at the edge of a thick black river. From its size and serious aspect, Scotty guessed it to be the Census and Excise Office for the wide, white bridge that stretched across the purpling dark water to the reeds on the other side. It was a very nice, bright, sturdy-looking bridge, built, Scotty knew, by his commission. A poxy, irritable official opened the door quickly on Scotty's first knock. Come in, quickly. Don't let the flesh flies in." "Flesh flies?" Decumus Scotti trembled. "You mean they eat human flesh?" "If you're fool enough to stand around and let them," the soldier said, rolling his eyes. He had half an ear, and Scotty, looking around at the other soldiers in the fort, noted that they all were well chewed. One of them had no nose at all to speak of. "Now, what's your business?" Scotty told them, and added that if they stood outside the fortress instead of inside, they might catch more smugglers. "You better be more concerned with getting across that bridge," the soldier sneered. "Tide's coming up. If you don't get a move on, you won't get to Black Marsh for 4 days." That was absurd. The bridge swamped by a rising tide on a river? Only the look in the soldier's eyes told Scotti he was not joking. Upon stepping out of the fort, he saw that the horses, evidently tired of being tortured by the flesh flies, had ripped free of the restraints and were bounding off into the woods. The oily water of the river was already lapping on the planks, oozing between the crevices. Scotti reflected that perhaps he would be more than willing to endure a wait of 4 days before going to Black Marsh. But Malik was already running across. Scotti followed him, wheezing. He was not in excellent shape and never had been. The box of commissioned materials was heavy. Halfway across, he paused to catch his breath, and then discovered he could not move. His feet were stuck. The black mud that ran through the river was a thick, gluey paste, and having washed over the planks Scotti was on, it held his feet fast. Panic seized him. Scotti looked up from his trap and saw Malik leaping from plank to plank ahead of him, closing fast on the reeds in the other side. "Help!" Scotti cried. "I'm stuck!" Malik did not even turn around, but kept jumping. "I know, sir. You need to lose weight." Decumus Scotti knew he was a few pounds over, and had meant to start eating less and exercising more, but embarking on a diet hardly seemed to promise timely aid in his current predicament. No diet on Nern would have helped him just then. However, on reflection, Scotti realized that the Red Guard intended that he drop the box of documents, for Malik was no longer carrying any of the essential supplies he had with him previously. With a sigh, Scotti threw the box of commission notes into the glove and felt the plank under him rise 1/4 of an inch, just enough to free him from the mud's clutches. With an agility born of extreme fear, Scotti began leaping after Malik, dropping onto every 3rd plank and springing up before the river gripped him. In 46 leaps, Decumus Scotti crashed through the reeds onto the solid ground behind Malik, and found himself in Black Marsh. He could hear behind him a slurping sound as the bridge, and his container of important official records of the Commission's affairs, was consumed by the rising flood of dark filth, never to be seen again. The Argonian Account, Book 2, by Joachim Yarth. Decumus Scotti emerged from the dirt and reeds, exhausted from running, his face and arms sheathed in red fleshlights. Looking back towards Cyrodiil, he saw the bridge disappear beneath the thick black river, and he knew he was not getting back until the tide went down in a few days' time. The river also held in its adhesive depths his files on the Black Marsh account. He would have to rely on his memory for his contacts in Gideon. Malik was purposefully striding through the reeds ahead, flailing ineffectually at the flashflies. Scotti hurried after him. "We're lucky, sir," said the Red Guard, which struck Scotti as an extraordinarily odd thing to say until his eyes followed where the man's finger was pointing. "The caravan is here." 21 rusted, mud-spattered wagons with rotting wood and wobbly wheels sat half sunk in the soft earth ahead. A crowd of Argonians, grey-scaled and grey-eyed, the sort of sullen manual labourers that were common in Cyrodiil, pulled at one of the wagons which had been detached from the others. As Scotti and Malik came closer, they saw that it was filled with a cargo of blackberries, so decayed that they had become hardly recognizable. More a festering jelly than a wagon-load of fruit. Yes, they were going to the city of Gideon, and yes, they said, Scotti could get a ride with them after they were finished unloading this shipment of lumberries. How long ago were they picked? Scotti asked, looking at the wagon's rotten produce. "The harvest was in last seed, of course," said the Argonian, who seemed to be in charge of the wagon. It was now sun's dusk, so they had been en route from the fields for a little over 2 months. Clearly, Scotti thought There were problems with transportation, but fixing that, after all, was what he was doing here as a representative of Lord Bannock's building commission. It took close to an hour of the berries rotting even more in the sun for the wagon to be pushed to the side. The wagons in front of it and behind it to be attached to one another, and one of the 8 horses from the front of the caravan to be brought around to the now independent wagon. The laborers moved with dispirited lethargy, and Scotti took the opportunity to inspect the rest of the caravan and talk to his fellow travelers. 4 of the wagons had benches in them, fit for uncomfortable riders. All the rest were filled with grain, meat, and vegetation in various stages of corruption. The travelers consisted of the 6 Argonian laborers, 3 imperial merchants, so bug-bitten that their skin looked as scaly as the Argonians themselves, and 3 cloaked fellows who were evidently Dunmer, judging by the red eyes that gleamed in the shadows under their hoods. All were transporting their goods along the Imperial Commerce Road. "This is a road?" Scott exclaimed, looking at the endless field of wreaths that reached up to his chin or higher. "It's solid ground, of a sort," one of the hooded Dunmer shrugged. "The horses eat some of the reed, and sometimes we set fire to it. It just grows right back up." Finally, the wagon master signaled that the caravan was ready to go, and Scotti took a seat in the 3rd wagon with the other Imperials. He looked around, but Malik was not on board. "I agreed to get you to Blackmarsh and take you back out," said the Red Guard, who had plumped down a rock in the sea of wreaths and was munching on a hairy carrot. "I'll be here when you get back." Scotti frowned, and not only because Malik had dropped the deferential title Sir while addressing him. Now he truly knew no one in Blackmarsh, but the caravan slowly grinded and bumped forward, so there was no time to argue. A noxious wind blew across the commerce road, casting patterns in the endless, featureless expanse of wreaths. In the distance, there seemed to be mountains, but they constantly shifted, and Scotti realized there were banks of mist and fog. Shadows fitted across the landscape, and when Scotti looked up, he saw they were being cast by giant birds with long, saw-like beaks nearly the size of the rest of their bodies, hawkwings. Chairo, Gemulus, an Imperial on Scotti's left, who might have been young but looked old and beaten, muttered, "Like everything else in this damnable place, they'll eat you if you don't keep moving. Beggars bounce down and give you a nasty chop, and then fly off and come back when you're mostly dead from blood loss." Scotti shivered. He hoped they would be in Gideon before nightfall. It was then it occurred to him that the sun was on the wrong side of the caravan. "Excuse me, sir," Scotti called to the wagon master. "I thought you said we were going to Gideon." The wagon master nodded. "Why are we going north then, when we should be going south?" There was no reply, but a sigh. Scotti confirmed with his fellow travelers that they too were going to Gideon, and none of them seemed very concerned about the circuitous route to get there. The seats were hard on his middle-aged back and buttocks, but the bumping rhythm of the caravan and the hypnotic waving wreaths gradually had an effect on him, and Scotti drifted off to sleep. He awoke in the dark some hours later, not sure where he was. The caravan was no longer moving, and he was on the floor under the bench next to some small boxes. There were voices speaking a hissing, clicking language Scotti didn't understand, and he peeked out between someone's legs to see what was happening. The moons barely pierced the thick mist surrounding the caravan, and Scotti did not have the best angle to see who was talking. For a moment, it looked like the grey wagon master was talking to himself, but the darkness had movement and moisture, in fact, glistening scales. It was hard to tell how many of these things were, but they were big, black, and the more Scotti looked at them, the more details he could see. When one particular detail emerged, huge mouth filled with dripping needle-like fangs. Scotti slipped back onto the bench. Their black little eyes had not fallen on him yet. The legs in front of Scotti moved and then began to thrash as their owner was grabbed and pulled out of the wagon. Scotti crouched further back, getting behind the little boxes. He didn't know much about concealment, but had some experience with shields. He knew that having something, anything in between you and bad things was always good. A few seconds after the legs had disappeared from sight, there was a horrible scream, and then a second, and a third. Different timbres, different accents, but the same inarticulate message: terror and pain, horrible pain. Scotti remembered a long-forgotten prayer to the god Stendar and whispered it to himself. Then there was silence, ghastly silence that lasted only a few minutes, but which seemed like hours, years. And then the carriage started rolling forward again. Scotti cautiously crawled out from under the carriage. Chirogemulus gave him a bemused grin. "There you are," he said. "I thought the Nagas took you." "Nagas?" "Nasty characters," Gemulus said, frowning. "Of others with legs and arms, 7 feet tall, 8, when they are mad. Come from the inner swamp, and they don't like it here much, so they are particularly peevish. You're the kind of posh imperial they are looking for." Scotti had never in his life thought of himself as posh. His mud and flies bespeckled clothing seemed eminently middle class at best to him. "What would they want me for?" "To rob, of course," the Imperial smiled. "And to kill. You didn't notice what happened to the others?" The Imperial frowned, as if struck by a thought. "You didn't sample from those boxes down below, did you? Like the sugar, do you?" "Gods, no," Scotti grimaced. The Imperial nodded, relieved. You just seemed a little slow. First time to Black Marsh, I gather." "Oh, hey, no." Hissed Piss. Scotti was just about to ask Gemulus what that vulgar term meant when the rain began. It was an inferno of foul-smelling, yellow-brown rain that washed over the caravan, accompanied by the growl of thunder in the distance. Gemulus worked to pull the roof up over the wagon, glaring at Scotti until he helped with the laborious process. He shuddered, not only from the cold damp, but from contemplation of the disgusting precipitation pouring down on the already nasty produce in the uncovered wagon. "We will be dry soon enough," Gemulus smiled, pointing out into the fog. Scotti had never been to Gideon, but he knew what to expect. A large settlement more or less laid out like an imperial city, with more or less imperial-style architecture and all the imperial comforts and traditions. More or less. The jumble of huts, half sunk in mud, was decidedly less. "Where are we?" asked Scotti, bewildered. "Ixinoag," replied Gemulus, pronouncing the queer name with confidence. "You were right. We were going north, when we should have been going south." The Argonian Account, Book 3, by Joachim Jarth. Decumus Scotti was supposed to be in Gideon, a thoroughly imperialized city in southern Blackmarsh, arranging business dealing to improve commerce in the province on behalf of Lord Bannock's building commission and its clients. Instead, he was in a half-submerged, rotten little village called Ixinoag, where he knew no one, except for a drug smuggler named Gemulus. Gemulus was not at all perturbed that the merchant caravan had gone north instead of south. He even let Scotti share his bucket of troth, tiny little crunchy fish he had brought from the villagers. Scotti would have preferred them cooked, or at any rate, dead, but Gemulus blithely explained that death, cooked troth, are deadly poison. "If I were where I was supposed to be," Scotti pouted, putting one of the wiggling little creatures in his mouth. I could be having a roast and some cheese and a glass of wine. I sell more sugar in the north and buy it in the south, he shrugged. You have to be more flexible, my friend. My only business is in Gideon. Scotti frowned. Well, you have a couple choices, replied the smuggler. You could just stay here. Most villagers in Argonia don't stay put for very long, and there's a good chance Ixinoag will drift right down the gates of Gideon. Might take you a month or two, probably the easiest way. That would put me far behind schedule. Next option, you could join up with the caravan again, said Gemulus. They might be going in the right direction this time, and they might not get stuck in the mud, and they might not be all murdered by Naga highwaymen. Not tempting, Scotti frowned. Any other ideas? Ride the routes, the underground express. Gemulus grinned. Follow me. Scotti followed Gemulus out of the village, into a copse of trees shrouded by bales of wispy moss. The smuggler kept his eye on the ground, poking at the viscous mud intermittently. Finally he found a spot, which triggered a mass of big, oily bubbles to rise to the surface. Perfect, he said. Now the important thing is not to panic. The express will take you due south. That's the wintertide migration. You will know you're near Gideon when you see a lot of red clay. Just don't panic, and when you see a mass of bubbles, that's a breathing hole you can use to get out. Scotti looked at Gemulus blankly. The man was talking perfect gibberish. What? Gemulus took Scotti by the shoulder and positioned him on top of the mass of bubbles. You stand right here. Scotti sank quickly into the mud, staring at the smuggler, horror-struck. And remember to wait till you see the red clay, and then the next time you see bubbles, push up. The more Scotti wriggled to get free, the faster he sunk. The mud enveloped Scotti to his neck, and he continued staring, unable to articulate anything but a noise like, ugh. And don't panic at the idea that you're being digested. You could live in a rootworm's belly for months. Scotti took one last panicked gasp of air and closed his eyes before he disappeared into the mud. The clerk felt the warmth he hadn't expected all around him. When he opened his eyes, he found out that he was entirely surrounded by a translucent goo and was traveling rapidly forward, southward, gliding through the mud as if it were air, skipping along an intricate network of roots. Scotti felt confusion and euphoria in equal measures, madly rushing forward through an alien environment of darkness, spinning around and over the thick, fibrous tentacles of the trees. It was as if he were high in the sky at midnight, not deep beneath the swamp in the underground express. Looking up slightly at the massive root structure above, Scotti saw something wriggle past. An 8-foot-long, armless, legless, colorless, boneless, eyeless, nearly shapeless creature, right in the roots. Something dark was inside of it, and it came closer. Scotti could see it was an Argonian man. He waved, and the disgusting creature the Argonian was in flattened slightly and rushed onwards. Gemulus' words began to reappear in Scotti's mind at the sight. The wintertide migration, airhole, you're being digested. These were the phrases that danced around as if trying to find some place to live in a brain which was highly resistant to them coming in. But there was no other way to look at the situation. Scotti had gone from eating living fish to being eaten alive as a way of transport. He was in one of those worms. Scotti made an executive decision to faint. He awoke in stages, having a beautiful dream of being held in a woman's warm embrace, smiling and opening his eyes. The reality of where he really was rushed over him. The creature was still rushing madly, blindly forward, gliding over roots, but it was no longer like a flight through the night sky. Now it was like the sky at sunrise, in pinks and reds. Scotti remembered Gemmeldus telling him to look for the red clay, and he would be near Gideon. The next thing he had to find was the bubbles. There were no bubbles anywhere. Though the inside of the worm was still warm and comfortable, Scotti felt the weight of the earth all around him. "Just don't panic," Gemmeldus had said. But it was one thing to hear that advice, and quite another to take it. He began to squirm, and the creature began to move faster at the increased pressure from within. Suddenly, Scotti saw it ahead of him, a slim spire of bubbles rising up through the mud from some underground stream, straight up through the roots to the surface above him. The moment the rootworm went through it, Scotti pushed with all of his might upwards, bursting through the creature's thin skin. The bubbles pushed Scotti up quickly, and before he could blink, he was popping out of a red slushy mud. 2 grey Argonians were standing under a tree nearby, holding a net. They looked in Scotti's direction with polite curiosity. In their net, Scotti noticed, were several squirming furry rat-like creatures. While he addressed them, another fell out of the tree. Though Scotti had never been educated in this practice, he recognized fishing when he saw it. "Excuse me, lads," Scotti said jovially. "I was wondering if you would point me in the direction of Gideon." The Argonians introduced themselves as Drawing Flame and Full of Flesh Leaves, and looked at one another, puzzling over the question. "Who you seek?" asked Full of Flesh Leaves. "I believe his name is," said Scotti, trying to remember the contents of his long-gone file of black marsh contacts in Gideon. "Archain Rightfoot Rock?" Drawing Flame nodded. "For 5 gold, show you way. Just east is plantation east of Gideon. Very nice." Scotti thought that the best business he had heard in 2 days, and handed Drawing Flames the 5 septims. The Argonians led Scotti onto a muddy ribbon of road that passed through the reeds and soon revealed the bright blue expanse of Topal Bay, far to the west. Scotti looked around at the magnificent walled estates, where bright crimson blossoms sprang forth from the very dirt of the walls, and surprised himself by thinking, "This is very pretty." The road ran parallel to a fast-moving stream, running eastward from Topal Bay. It was called the Oncobra River, he was told. It ran deep into Black Marsh, to the very dark heart of the province, peeking past the gates to the plantations east of Gideon. Scotti saw that few of the fields were tended. Most had rotten crops from harvests past still clinging to wilted vines. Orchards of desolate, leafless trees. The Argonian serf who worked the fields were thin, weak, near death, more like haunted spirits than creatures of life and reason. 2 hours later, as the 3 continued their trudge east, the estates were still impressive, at least from a distance. The road was still solid, if weedy, but Scotti was irritated, horrified by the field workers and the agricultural estate, and no longer charitable towards the area. How much further? Full of Fresh Leaves and Drawing Flame looked at one another, as if that question was something that hadn't occurred to them. "Archain is east," Full of Fresh Leaves pondered. "Near or far?" Drawing Flame shrugged non-committally and said to Scotti, "For 5 gold, show you way. Just east is plantation. Very nice." "You don't have any idea, do you?" Scotti cried. "Why couldn't you just tell me that in the first place, when I might have asked someone else?" Around the bend up ahead, there was the sound of hoofbeats, a horse coming closer. Scotti began to walk towards the sound to hail the rider, and didn't see Drawing Flame taloned claws flash out and cast a spell at him. He felt it, though, a kiss of ice along his spine, the muscles along his arms and legs suddenly immobile, as if wrapped in rigid steel. He was paralyzed. The great curse of paralysis, as the reader may be unfortunate enough to know, is that you continue to see and think even though your body does not respond. The thought that went through Scotty's mind was, "Damn." The drawing flame and full of fresh leaves were, of course, like most simple day laborers in Black Marsh, accomplished illusionists and no friend of the Imperial. The Argonians shoved Decumus Scotti to the side of the road, just as the horse and rider came around the corner. He was an impressive figure, a nobleman in a flashing dark green cloak, the exact same color as his scaled skin, and a frilled hood that was part of his flesh and sat upon his head like a horned crown. "Greetings, brother," the rider said to the two. "Greetings, Argonian right foot-rock," they responded, and then full of flesh leaves added, "What is my lord's business on this fine day?" No rest, the Argonian sighed regally. "One of my she-workers gave birth to twins." "Twins?" "Fortunately, there's a good trader in town for those, and she didn't put up too much of a fuss. And then there's a fool of an Imperial from Lord Bannock's building commission I am supposed to meet with in Gideon. I'm sure he will want the grand tour before he opens up the treasury for me." Such a lot of fuss. Drawing flame and full of flesh leaves sympathized, and then, as Argonian right foot-rock rode off, they went to look for their hostage. Unfortunately for them, gravity being the same in Black Marsh as elsewhere in Tamriel, their hostage, Decumus Scotti, had continued to roll down from where they left him, and was, at that moment, in the Oncobra River, drowning. The Argonian Account, Book 4, by Wagin Yarth. Decumus Scotti was drowning, and he didn't think much of it. He couldn't move his arms or his legs to swim because of the paralysis spell the Argonian peasant had lobbed at him, but he wasn't quite sinking. The Oncobra River was crashing force of white water and currents that could carry along large rocks with ease, so Scotti tumbled head over heels, spinning, bumping, bouncing along. He figured that soon enough he would be dead, and that would be better than being in Black Marsh. He wasn't too panicked about it all when he felt his lungs fill with water and cold blackness fell upon him. For a while, for the first time in some time, Decumus Scotti felt peace, blessed darkness, and then pain came to him, and he felt himself coughing, spewing water up from his belly and lungs. A voice said, "Oh, bother, he's alive, ain't he? Now?" Scotti wasn't quite sure if that were true. Even when he opened his eyes and looked at the face above him, it was an Argonian, but unlike any he had ever seen anywhere. The face was thin and long, like a thick lance. The scales were ruby red, brilliant in the sunlight. It blinked at him, its eyelids opening and closing in vertical slits. "I don't suppose we should eat you, should we now?" The creature smiled, and Scotti could tell from its teeth that it was no idle suggestion. "Thank you," said Scotti weakly. He craned his head slightly to find out who the "we" were, and discovered he was on the muddy bank of the still, slushy river, surrounded by a group of Argonians with similarly needle-like faces and a whole rainbow of scales. Bright greens and gem-like purples, blues and oranges. "Can you tell me, am I near, well, anywhere?" The ruby-colored Argonian laughed. "No, you're in the middle of everywhere, and near nowhere." "Oh," said Scotti, who grasped the idea that space did not mean much in Black Marsh. "And what are you?" "We are Agaseps," the ruby-colored Argonian replied. "My name is Nomu." Scotti introduced himself. "I am a senior clerk in Lord Bannock's building commission in the Imperial City. My job was to come here to try to fix the problems with commerce, but I've lost my agenda, haven't met any of my contacts, the Archchains of Gideon, pompous assimilated slaver kleptocrats," a small lemon-colored Agasef murmured with some feeling. "And now I just want to go home." Nomu smiled, his long mouth arching up like a host happy to see an unwanted guest leave a party. "Yes, we'll guide you." Shex, it seemed, was the bitter little yellow creature, and he was not at all pleased at the assignment. With surprising strength, he hoisted Scotti up, and for a moment the clerk was reminded of Gemul's dropping him into the bubbling muck that led to the underground express. Instead, Chess shoved Scotti towards a tiny little raft, racer thing, that bobbed on the surface of the water. "This is how you travel?" "We don't have the broken wagons and dying horses of your brothers of the outside," Chess replied, rolling his tiny eyes. "We don't know better." The Argonian sat at the back of the craft and used his whip-like tail to propel and navigate the craft. They traveled quickly around swirling pools of slime that stank of centuries of putrefaction, past pinnacled mountains that seemed sturdy but suddenly fell apart at the slightest ripple in the still water, under bridges that may have once been metal but were now purely rust. "Everything in Tamriel flows down to Black Marsh," Chess said. As they slid through the water, Chess explained to Scotti that the Agasebs were one of the many Argonian tribes that lived in the interior of the province, near the Hist. Finding little in the outside world worth seeing, he was fortunate to have been found by them. The Nagas, the toad-like Patru, and the winged Sarpa would have killed him on the spot. There were other creatures, too, to be avoided. Though there were few natural predators in inner Black Marsh, the scavengers that rooted in the garbage seldom shied away from a living meal. Hagwinds circled overhead, like the ones Scotti had seen in the west. Shesh fell silent and stopped the raft completely, waiting for something. Scotti looked in the direction Shesh was watching and saw nothing unusual in the filthy water. Then he realized that the pool of green slime in front of them was actually moving, and fairly quickly, from one bank to the other. It deposited small bones behind it as it oozed up into the reeds and disappeared. "Body plasm," Shesh explained, moving the boat forward again. "Big word. It will strip you to the bone by the second syllable." Scotti, desirous to distract himself from the sights and smells that surrounded him, thought it a good time to compliment his pilot on his excellent vocabulary. It was particularly impressive, given how far the civilization they were. The Argonians in the east did, in fact, speak so well. "They tried to erect a temple of Mara near here, in Ampholo, 20 years ago," Shesh explained, and Scotti nodded, remembering reading about it on the files before they were lost. They all perished quite dreadfully of swamp rot in the first month, but they left behind some excellent books. Scotti was going to inquire further when he saw something so huge, so horrifying, it made him stop frozen. Half submerged in the water ahead was a mountain of spines, lying on 9-foot-long claws. Wide eyes stared blindly forward, and then suddenly the whole creature spasmed and lurched, the jaw of its mouth shutting out, exposing tusks clotted with gore. "Swamp Leviathan," Shesh whistled, impressed. "Very, very dangerous." Scotti gasped, wondering why the Agaseb was so calm, and more, why he was continuing to steer the raft forward towards the beast. "Of all the creatures in the world, the rats are sometimes the worst," said Shesh, and Scotti noticed that the huge creature was only a husk. Its movement was from the hundreds of rats that had burrowed into it, rapidly eating their way from the inside out, bursting from the skin in spots. "They are indeed," Scotti said, and his mind went to the Black Marsh flies, buried deep in the mud, and 4 decades of imperial work in Black Marsh. The two continued westward, through the heart of Black Marsh. Shesh showed Scotti the vast, complicated ruins of the Kothringi capitals, fields of ferns and flowered grasses, quiet streams under canopies of blue moss, and the most astonishing sight of Scotti's life, the great forest of full-grown hist trees. They never saw a living soul until they arrived at the edge of the Imperial Commerce Road, just east of Slow Point, where Malik, Scotti's Red Guard guide, was waiting patiently. "I was going to give you 2 more minutes," the Red Guard scowled, dropping the last of his food onto the pile at his feet. "No more, sir." The sun was shining bright when Decumus Scotti rode into the Imperial City, and as it caught the morning dew, the could lend a glisten to every building as if they had been newly polished for his arrival. It astonished him how clean the city was, and how few beggars there were. The protracted edifice of Lord Vanek's building commission was the same as it had always been, but still, the very sight of it seemed exotic and strange. It was not covered in mud. The people within actually generally worked. Lord Vanek himself, though, singularly squat and squinty, seemed immaculate, not only relatively clean of dirt and scabs, but also relatively uncorrupt. Scotti couldn't help but stare at him when he first caught sight of his boss. Vanek stared right back. "You're a sight," the little fellow frowned. "Did your horse drag you to Dark Marsh and back? I would say go home and fix yourself, but there are dozens of people here to see you. I hope you have solutions for them." It was no exaggeration. Nearly 20 of Cyrodiil's most powerful and wealthiest people were waiting for him. Scotti was given an office even larger than Lord Vanek's, and he met with each. First among the commission's clients were 5 independent traders, blustering and loaded with gold, demanding to know what Scotti intended to do about improving the trade routes. Scotti summarized for them the conditions of the main roads, the state of the merchants' caravans, the sunken bridges, and all the other impediment between the frontier and the marketplace. They told him to have everything replaced and repaired and gave him the gold necessary to do it. Within 3 months, the bridge at Slough Point had disappeared into the muck. The great caravan had collapsed into decrepitude, and the main road from Gideon had been utterly swallowed by the swamp water. The Argonians began once again to use the old ways, their personal rafts, and sometimes the underground express to transport the grain in small quantities. It took a third of the time, 2 weeks, to arrive in Cyrodiil, none of it rotten. The Archbishop Amara was the next client Scotti met with, a kind-hearted man, horrified by the tales of Argonian mothers selling their children into slavery. He pointedly asked Scotti if it were true. "Sadly, yes," Scotti replied, and the Archbishop showered him with septims, telling the clerk that food must be brought to the province to ease their suffering, and the schools must be improved so they could learn to help themselves. Within 5 months, the last book had been stolen from the deserted Maran monastery in Ampolo. As the Archanes went bankrupt, their slaves returned to his parents' tiny farms. The backwater Argonians found that they could grow enough to feed their families, provided they had enough hard workers in their enclave, and the buyer's market for slaves sharply declined. Ambassador Selith, concerned about the rising crime in northern Blackmarsh, brought with him the contributions of many other expatriate Argonians like himself. They wanted more imperial guards on the border at Slough Point, more magically lit lanterns posted along the main roads at regular intervals, more patrol stations, and more schools built to allow young Argonians to better themselves and not turn to crime. Within 6 months, there were no more nagas roaming the road, as there were no merchants traveling them to rob. The thugs returned to the fetid inner swamp, where they felt much happier, their constitutions enriched by the rot and pestilence that they loved. Salith and his constituency were so pleased by the crime rate dropping, they brought even more gold to Decumus Scotti, telling him to keep up the good work. Blackmarsh simply was, is, and always shall be, unable to sustain a larger scale cash crop plantation economy. The Argonians and anyone else, the whole of Tamriel, could live in Blackmarsh on subsistence farming, just raising what they needed. That was not sad, Scotti thought. That was hopeful. Scotti's solution to each of their dilemmas had been the same. 10% of the gold they gave him went to Lord Vanek's building commission. The rest, Scotti kept for himself and did exactly nothing about the requests. Within a year, Decumus Scotti had embezzled enough to retire very comfortably, and Blackmarsh was better off than it had been in 40 years. To be fair, man, you deserve it. Come on, you deserve that. You know what? You defeated the system and you got a good amount of gold out of it. I'm proud of you, Scotti. I'm proud of you, Decumus. You're doing great.